Welcome back to Women Making Moves, where we celebrate the moves that women are making. My name is Amy Pons. I'm a Master Certified Life Coach and an energy healer. I'm joined today with Marie Hemingway. Marie is the founder and CTO of the award-winning not-for-profit Speak Out Revolution, bringing strategic insights to individuals and organizations. This is why we edit.
It's fine, leave it in.
I should. It's human, whatever. Marie is the founder and CTO of the award-winning not-for-profit Speak Out Revolution, bringing strategic insights to individuals and organizations to optimally drive efforts to eradicate workplace inequality. Marie splits her time between Speak Out Revolution and is a principal consultant at Atkins, a global engineering consultancy. Marie primarily supports the UK Defence Enterprise, designing and delivering programs to mature organizational approaches to asset management with expertise in digital transformation, strategic investment, decision-making, and people-centric change. Marie, welcome.
Hi, Amy. So happy to be here. I feel like I really need to make my bio far more concise. I apologize that you had to read all of that out.
Please don't apologize. Let's celebrate it. I just love when there are really a lot of big words for me. And they're not like big confusing words, but it's just like I don't read bios beforehand on purpose because I like to see what it sparks inside me to initiate the conversation for the podcast. So you just have a lot of really amazing words and the things that
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I needed to really focus on enunciation during that bio. The other thing that I want to share, since you included it here, is currently what you're focusing on is, of course, Marie is 6 months pregnant. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're focused on making workplaces work for pregnant women. Yes. You're blogging your experiences on hashtag working while pregnant with micro actions everyone can take to create more inclusive workplaces for women. Yes. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I am 6 months pregnant. This is my second pregnancy. My son is now 4 years old, and I think I'm, of course, more experienced in the workplace now. My voluntary work is really focused on inclusion. I'm self-interested, so I'm, very, very interested in inclusion for women. And I felt like being pregnant this time has really helped me reflect on the experiences of working while pregnant with my first child and just really the many, many ways that, although completely unintentional, I think workplaces were just not designed with women in mind. And I remember thinking it's so much harder for me to just do my job because nobody's really thought about this. And I don't think it's that people intentionally making it difficult for pregnant women. I think it's that people just aren't aware. And I think if you haven't gone through that experience of being pregnant, trying to work in a corporate setting, you just don't know the new challenges that presents and the things that you can do to help. So I'm all nowadays about influencing where I can within my sphere. And I kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be great if every time I was reminded of one of those barriers or realized that things could be done better, I could just write a quick post saying, here's one of the things that is different when you're working while pregnant. This is the challenge it poses. This is how it makes you feel. This is how it impacts your ability to do work. And here are the actions that anybody as an individual could take to make it that little bit more inclusive for the next pregnant woman in their workplace. And so the whole idea around it was just trying to use my experience and trying to encourage others where they have influence or perhaps a role that could influence policy or processes or workplace settings to have that information to go in action should they wish to. So that's the whole vibe of the Working While Pregnant post series. It's quite therapeutic as well because I get to rant about things that really annoy me. I'm pregnant, so that helps.
I bet it is. And I'm sure we'll get into more of like what those are, some of the things you've been experiencing. And I love that you're not simply venting about it, you're asking for true change or getting to those folks who could impact policy and just being aware. It's kind of amazing to me as I walk my spiritual journey is to have an open heart and realize everyone comes from a place of training and conditioning depending on what they experienced. And it is kind of amazing though. And I started my business almost a year ago. I pivoted away from corporate America from almost 20 years. And it is kind of amazing how the response I would get, I was the leader of the Women's Employee Resource Group, and I would bring certain things up to, of course, the male-dominated C-suite, and they're like, "Oh, we've never thought about that." I'm like, "You've never had to." And
Hmm.
I always try not to come with it from like a place of anger, but like a place of like enlightenment. But sometimes it is just truly annoying.
Hmm.
So what are some of those things? Like, what are some of the microaggressions? What are the things that you talk about?
Yeah, so just thinking back, I think I have like around 8 posts that I've done so far, mostly because I've been so unwell in my first trimester that I just didn't have the energy or time because I do work and I already have a child, of course. I'm just thinking about the posts that have probably resonated the most with people. One thing that I've tried to raise awareness of is the challenges for people who are pregnant that have to travel for work. So I'm an external consultant. I work on client sites, which means that, and I love public transport, which means that I often use the rail systems in the UK. Unfortunately, for us in the UK at least, rail systems are pretty temperamental. They're usually delayed. They're often overcrowded, incredibly expensive. And that's fine, but I support it from a sustainability perspective. When you're 6 months pregnant and you're on a delayed service that is massively overcrowded and you can't get a seat and you feel unwell and you've been working all day, you can't stand up for 2 hours. It's painful. It induces anxiety when you're thinking about traveling for work, and it makes it such that you don't want to travel, which means that you don't want to do your job. And so one of the, things that I talked about was trying to raise this issue, and one, inviting UK Rail to implement a nationwide policy to essentially allow pregnant women to upgrade to first class for free in the event that they can't access a seat, because we don't have that policy in place. But also trying to raise this with organizations that are asking their pregnant employees to travel. And I'm really, really pleased to say that even before I sent that post, I had multiple levels of management within my organization, Atkins Realis, who had proactively said, if you are traveling for work and you find yourself in that situation, of course, we would reimburse your travel expenses if you needed to. Like, we want to support you in role. So it's absolutely fantastic to see that these things can help make things better for people. And now I'm now I'm focused on, okay, how do we get that in our policy? How do we make it so the next woman doesn't have to have that conversation? It's standard. So rail travel has been one. Another one that's really resonated with people is parental leave and pay. And I know that's a big topic in the US. Slightly different in the UK in that in professional settings, in corporate environments, typically, or what you would more generally see in terms of parental pay and leave is organizations are much more willing to enhance pay for women. So to give them a very long maternity leave, 6 months fully paid leave. They do not do the same for men. Often it is 2 weeks or maybe 4 weeks paid leave. And it looks great from the outside. It sounds great. It sounds like we support women. But actually, when you look at it, that is a policy that really embeds gender stereotypes from not even from day one of a child's life, right? From before that child is born, that sets values within our society, that establishes belief systems that say women are responsible for childcare and men go to work. It reinforces the gender pay gap. Studies show now we can't get rid of the gender pay gap without equally enhancing paid leave for all genders. And so one of the topics that I've tried to talk about is it's fantastic that my organization want to support me, and they're very generous with their maternity package, which is, I know that is not the case for many people in the US, and you are fighting battles over there to give people access to paid leave. So I'm very grateful for it. At the same time, it has an economic impact on women because it is holding us back from achieving gender equity, and it's preventing fathers and second parents from being able to be involved in raising their children from a young age. So that's one of the things that I think resonated with a lot of people, which I think is great because we have a general election coming up soon. Parental leave and pay is one of the topics that many people in the activist group that I follow are talking about, which is really, really good. And then I think you mentioned microaggressions. That's been my kind of latest post. I've got to the point now in my pregnancy where you can really tell. I'm, like I would be walking down the street and someone's like, oh, she's definitely pregnant. And what I found in my last pregnancy is as soon as, I mean, women have challenges in the workplace, I would say anyway. Certainly I have working in, I would say that my career has been in the engineering sector. it has a systemic underrepresentation of women, and there are challenges associated with that. It is not unique to engineering for sure, but I think when you become visibly pregnant, I think the challenges you experience change. They become focused on you being pregnant. And certainly in my last pregnancy, I observed what I would consider to be microaggressions or, everyday slights, indignities, put downs, insults, often not intentional. Often I found it was just people saying, exposing the assumptions on which they base their perspectives in life that actually, on closer reflection, are quite offensive to somebody who cares about working and their career. And I think that resonated with a lot of women who have worked while pregnant, who've had similar things. People make remarks about their appearance, people make assumptions about their career aspirations, their commitment to work. And it's just really interesting to see the many different ways in which that manifests for pregnant women in the workplace, because it's a good opportunity for people to look at what that actually looks like and then question whether or not they've been part of it and how they're going to do things differently in future. So I'd say those are the three topics that have really resonated. I have many more, of course, to come as I experience them. But that's kind of the vibe of what I'm kind of blogging about.
You segued really nicely, unintentionally, right into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is
Oh,
exactly one of your recent posts, your most recent post actually on LinkedIn about the microaggressions. So I want to read your post about specifically what you experienced. So I'm going to jump to the middle of it. Inappropriate comments relating to your appearance. Quote unquote, that prego one over there, said within earshot by a client to a colleague who absolutely knew my name last time I was pregnant. Beliefs and assertions about your motivations and commitments at work, which quote unquote, so you can be closer to home for the baby. The standard response and rationale for me taking a new role after my last baby. No, it was the promotion, pay raise, and interesting work, actually. Proximity to my child didn't really factor in. So what's my call to action? Two things. Disrupt microaggressions. If you hear an everyday insult, put down, slight, or indignity aimed at a pregnant colleague, intentional or not, challenge it. Ask them to, one, repeat it, and two, what they meant by it. And next, challenge your perceptions, assumptions, and thinking about your pregnant colleagues. People are individuals. You don't know their motivations if you don't ask. And this leads into inviting more women to talk about hashtag working while pregnant. Tell me more about these and how did these make you feel?
yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, you can imagine that as someone who has, well, my entire career, nearly 15 years now, I've spent working in fields with, an underrepresentation of women, predominantly engineering sector. I work in defense now. I have experienced my fair share of microaggressions, offensive comments, degrading remarks, everything, you can name it. The one that really stands out to me is like I can recall how it made me feel at the time. And and it's almost upsetting to think back on was interestingly the first comment that you read out there. I was on a client site walking into a workshop that I was leading with someone who knew me, who knew my name, and turned to a colleague and just said, yeah, that prego one over there. And at the time, it's really weird because I look back and I think I don't understand why it was so upsetting to me. And I think I've spent a long time reflecting on it. And I think it probably wasn't intended to be offensive, but I think it comes down to feeling almost dehumanized, as if I'm not, now that I'm pregnant, I'm not even worthy of somebody referring to me by my name. I am literally referred to as this generic host person whose sole kind of purpose is to carry this baby. And I just remember thinking, I feel like absolute crap. And I remember sat in that workshop, thinking, why am I even here? Why am I traveling by train where I can't get a seat to come to this place to try and help you with my expertise, to be spoken to like that, be made to feel just worthless? And it seems like really innocuous when you read it out loud, it doesn't really seem that offensive. But of all the things that I've ever been called or, referred to as, or kind of a microaggression that I've received, that is the one that really stands out to me as probably the worst. And so I kind of feel like, and it's almost like, should I really have to tell people this? Like, just call people their names, right? It doesn't matter if they're pregnant. Doesn't matter if you think they are fat or I don't know, whatever label that you want to put on them. Just use their names, please, because they're individuals and they're people, and that would be great. So please, everyone, it's Marie.
It's Marie. I resonate with that, not as a pregnant woman, but as a woman, a lot of times I'll be called sweetheart, honey, Jill, darling, and I'll respond actually the same way. I'll say, "Oh, just call me Amy,"
Mhm.
and they end up getting like embarrassed but offended, and I'm
Mhm.
like, "Well, that's on you. That's not mine." Like if you get offended
Yeah.
me asking you to call me my name, that's my right. The other thing that I was thinking when you were just saying is, at least I don't know if this is specific to US, but there was something like when I was a small child,
Mhm.
and probably back in like the 50s, 60s, we referred to women as when they were pregnant, we would say like their condition, or like, oh, don't do that in your condition. What does condition mean what does that land for you?
So it's interesting you mentioned this because well, I was on a call earlier with someone from work and we did our work call and then at the very end, because I work with very nice people, they were like, oh, and how is everything with your health? How are you getting on with your pregnancy? And then I was basically saying, I feel great now that I'm back at work because my work is not physical. It's whenever I try to do anything physical, like climb the stairs. And I was like, physical things are very hard in my condition. So I used the word to describe my to describe myself earlier, which I think is fine. Because I think one of the things that I wonder if people really understand is how all of the marketing associated with pregnancy is like, oh, somebody gets pregnant, it's a magical time. You're glowing, your hair's thick and lustrous and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I found or have found this pregnancy and my previous pregnancy to be incredibly difficult on my health. And I'm probably an averagely healthy person. Luckily, my job is a mental job, not a physical job, because there's no way I would have been able to, physically do things at certain points. And I have a very flexible working arrangement. So I have the freedom and autonomy to work when I feel well and not work when I don't. So I think it is important to recognize that for some women, not all, pregnancy is a condition. It does change physically and psychologically in some people how they navigate their everyday lives. And I think it's important to recognize that, but simultaneously not constrain everyone with the same kind of level of ability or inability.
I think that's exactly right. It depends on how the woman feels specifically about the term condition. But I think what has happened is a certain subset of people have used it as a negative and say it's
Mhm.
like to limit women who are
Yes.
pregnant. So I think that's the difference. It's not a bad health thing, or it could be it could be a challenging health thing depending on the woman. So interesting. You also bring up about earlier. I am a plus size woman, a beautiful, gorgeous plus size woman, and I embrace that. And in the workplace and out in society in general, out in public, I was approached at least once a month about my due date or my pregnancy, or it's like, when am I due? Oh, congratulations on your, I'm like, I'm not pregnant. And so
Mm,
happened for years. And I was like,
hmm
oh, imagine the toll that took. So after a while, I just kind of met it with the same kind of energy. And I was like, oh, I'm not pregnant. I'm just fat. And the horror on the person's face,
hmm
I was like,
hmm
well, and
You
so
are educating people on what is appropriate and not appropriate to approach strangers about. Is it interesting? This is the topic of a future post. How there is literally, in my opinion, never a good occasion, unless you are someone's physician or doctor, to ask them if they are pregnant. If they haven't told you, that's because they don't want you to know. It just makes no sense. Don't ask someone if they're pregnant. It's not your business. And if they haven't told you, it's probably because they aren't, or they don't want you to know. So leave it. I've heard this from a few different women. I definitely have, when I was younger or earlier in my career, had comments or just people ask me the question, "Oh, are you pregnant?" In a joking way, right? But in response to me saying like, "Oh, I feel really tired today." And I just think, oh, don't do it. Don't do it. It will be a future post, Amy. I'll
amazing.
tag you.
I was going to say, please feel free to tag
I
me.
will.
And I've made the choice in life not to bear children. But imagine if I had gone through a loss and
hmm
and
Mm-hmm.
I was still, my body was still processing that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just to your point, it's like just don't. I mean, I think it's back to what you said about the stereotypical historical. It's like it's such a magical time. It's so happy. So women should be happy to be
Elated,
early,
yes.
and it's like, maybe, maybe not. And it's kind of like anything else in life. It's like a pendulum, so I've heard, and this is, we'll get into kind of like the next question or topic. What would you say to both ends of the spectrum that that maybe get exactly what you're talking about, but then those others that are maybe more, I don't know if you want to say like
And
more traditional mindset or like the historical mindset that it's you're supposed to feel a certain way? What would you say
yes,
that both get what you're talking about, but maybe like don't get what you're talking about?
yeah. So I think I probably have quite strong views on this, right? Because when it comes to, and I might capture some of that under microaggressions, right? When somebody says something that, even if the intention is good, has a negative impact on the individual that is receiving it, what we have to focus on is the response of the individual. And in this case, it's the pregnant person, right? It doesn't matter if your intention was good. If you've caused harm, then that's what needs to be recognized. And I think on the topic of, so for someone like me, for example, I feel like I'm old enough and I've taken enough offensive remarks to understand that maybe someone has said something and they intended it to be a nice thing, and I'm not going to hold that against them, right? I'll probably just correct them and move on, and hopefully they'll learn from that in their next interaction. I mean, what I would say on the topic of the expectation that a woman is elated because she is pregnant or that she feels a certain way, I think women are subject to massive pressure in society, and we're at a time where the expectations on women are, in my opinion, ridiculous. Women are supposed to work full time, have 100 children that apparently they raise full time while simultaneously paying for childcare, but not having childcare, and and doing voluntary work and all of these things. And I think it takes a toll on women's mental health when it comes to constantly being bombarded with the expectations of how they should be and how they should think and how they should feel by society. And especially at the time of pregnancy and motherhood, I think it's a very dangerous thing for people to force that view, or to reinforce that view to an individual who's pregnant, right? Because the reality is something like 1 in 10 women will experience postnatal depression. 1 in 100 women will have postnatal psychosis. Like, we have to get quite real about what it is like to produce a child and then look after a child. It's hard. It takes a toll. And it's not all happiness and joy and onesies and these things. Often, often, it's 3 a.m. You're not sure why you're crying. There's a baby crying. You're covered in feces and you're not sure where the light switch is anymore and you haven't slept in a week. And it's fine to be annoyed about that. And it's fine not to be joyous. And to be thinking that you wish you weren't on maternity leave. You wish you were back at work because it's so much easier. I feel like I have pretty strong views on it.
It goes almost beyond pregnancy. It's like, don't lump anyone individual into like a broad brush or like a preconceived notion or assumption that they're more of the same. It's this
Mhm.
copy paste culture. That's not what we're looking for, especially as we shift into the divine feminine and embrace her back in. And keeping in mind that we as women, we already, like in our womb space, we already have, before we even come out of the womb, we're ingrained with anything that our mother experienced, grandmother, great grandmother, that's all already in her womb and in our womb. And
Mhm.
as we keep going, it's like the ancestral or the generational experiences is already in us. So, and I think that's probably something that a lot of the masses don't understand too, is just like what's already in us and just being mindful of that.
Mhm. Mhm. I can definitely appreciate that from, I mean, the work that I do with Speak Out Revolution when we're looking at kind of workplace harassment and bullying. In my research, around the work that we do, I go down some rabbit holes, and understanding the research behind, generational trauma and how that passes through our genetics was super interesting, which I think is what you were describing, but in slightly more articulate language than I could.
No, that's awesome. And it's interesting because this similar what I'm doing work in this year is it's a little bit of a sidebar, but it falls into you mentioned workplace bullying.
Mhm.
So I'm in an organization called End Workplace Abuse. And there's actually legislation that is about
Fantastic.
that is called the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And
Hmm hmm
we need a law in the US
hmm
to hold employers accountable and the abusers accountable for psychological abuse.
hmm
Today, we don't have that.
hmm
And the emergence of psychological abuse, bullying, mobbing in the workplace specifically is at, of course, an all-time high, especially after pandemic, and people are so desperate to get back to what felt safe, and that was
hmm
never safe by the way, in a lot of cases. And so
hmm
anyway, the big work this year is to move it state by state so that we again eventually have it on a federal level
hmm
where same thing like from an environmental perspective or a safety perspective, there would be a federal entity that would come into an employer and see what's going on. Psychological abuse. And I would imagine, and I want your thoughts on this, psychological abuse from a pregnancy perspective, that is workplace abuse. That can be, right?
hmm So I think I mean, this, you've sparked so many things in my head. I was just going to say, I don't know how closely you've taken a look at what we do at Speak Out Revolution, but we do capture global data on workplace harassment and bullying, and we absolutely want to partner with organizations like yours that are campaigning for changes to legislation. We share our data, securely and safely with organizations like yours that are doing that. And I would love to have a conversation about whether we can support the work that you're doing. We collect data for the US. We've just partnered with a researcher at Cornell who's using our data specifically for the US to look at recommendations that organizations can implement to disrupt the challenges that people face in the workplace. So I've been sidetracked, and I can't quite remember the question that you asked me that I wanted to
No,
answer.
my question was, where does pregnancy bias or what do you call that fits under the umbrella of workplace abuse?
Yeah, sure. So it's all coming back to me now. So I'm thinking about kind of UK law and the way that we survey and capture data around this topic. And I'll start by saying, the majority of experiences that we capture, when you look at the data holistically, the majority of unfair treatment in the workplace would be captured under psychological abuse. So it's not that people are physically pushing each other or, punching each other in the face. It's that people are, it's often low level behaviors that go unnoticed, that accumulate over time to deliver an impact often to people's mental health. So I think that, the top three behaviors that are reported to us are gaslighting, microaggressions, discounting, so discounting someone's contributions. When it comes to pregnancy and maternity, we capture that as, or under UK law, it's considered a protected characteristic. So what we do through our survey work is say, tell us what your experience looked like. Tell us what you think it was driven by. Was it the fact that you are pregnant? Was it the fact that you are Black? Was it the fact that you are a woman? So what I would, what I typically say is, consistency across experiences with respect to it mostly being psychological. There's variance, I think, within that, how that manifests for different demographics, so for different protective characteristics. So, women who are pregnant, they'll still experience microaggressions at the same rates that women do, say, but they will look different. It manifests differently. Usually it's about your appearance because you're pregnant. It's someone saying that prego one over there as opposed to a typical microaggression that a woman would experience.
It's almost all psychological to your point, and that's why it's so hard to one prove, and that's why again we need a law.
Mhm,
It becomes, at least in the US, and I'm sure you know this, when someone raises their hand and says, I am experiencing psychological abuse, there's this notion of, well, prove it. And then there's no precedent or law in the US that allows the proceeding. And what happens inside the organization
mhm.
oftentimes is that the person that raises their hand, they become the target to get out because
Yep.
they've become a threat. So the
Mhm.
company will go into protective mode of the higher stake employee, that it's all tied back to the money and the shareholders and risk rather than
And
like a human experience.
absolutely. And, everything that you're saying resonates so strongly because we see it very strongly in our data. Like everything that you've just said, we've got the stat to say, based on the thousands of people that have reported their experiences, this is what it looks like. So one thing that is interesting is, maybe you can't prove psychological abuse, but what you can show is that, say, when a pregnant employee says, hey, I think there's a problem here, you can show that organizations choose to not address the problem in the right way, that they choose to enable retaliation against that individual, that they choose to force them out of the organization, often with a non-disclosure agreement. And so we see all of this within our data. That's part of the process, like the harassment and bullying experience itself. I think that that part of it is always going to happen. People are raised with different, biases, prejudices. Our society is ever more kind of mixed with people from different backgrounds. That I think will always happen, especially in a workplace setting where you're bringing, disparate groups of people together. The bit that doesn't have to happen is the part that follows, where somebody says, I don't like this behavior, it's impacting me negatively. The processes that they have to go through within the organizational setting, the secondary trauma that they have to experience, both inside the organization to get to the point of a resolution, which is often not a resolution, and then external to the organization when they realize that they have to pursue things legally. And so it's that part of it that we really, really want to target. That could be done so much better. And we have so much data that shows, this intervention you put in place is not going to help because it doesn't address what people think is the problem. So no point. Yeah, would love to talk to you about how we can support what
Oh.
you're doing with our data for sure.
And what's interesting when you say about retaliation, it could be both, and I'm going to give my personal experience. I experienced workplace abuse, and the person abusing actually shared with me, they said, "You'll never catch me. I'll never write anything down." So
Mm-hmm.
the awareness, first
Mm-hmm.
of all. And then
Mm-hmm.
second, when I did raise it, what's interesting is I had an interesting retaliation, meaning I was proposed with more money to kind of say like, hey, just keep this, just keep
Mm-hmm.
this, keep this low. To your point, it's like when you say it's always going to happen, I really hope not. Imagine a workplace where organizations like Speak Out Revolution and workplace abuse and the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, imagine a place where when someone raises their hand, it's handled in a way where all parties feel safe
Mm-hmm.
moving forward and being able to discuss it and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, listen, based on my upbringing and experience or what I know as real lived experience, this feels harmful or unsafe for me. And the
Mm-hmm.
other person, like the abuser, let's say, whether intentioned or not, they actually understand and change behavior based on that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to evolve into this again, skewed in the strong masculine, these ironclad defenses go up. And so to the point where, like, at least in the US, to your point, when legal action is pursued, again, there's no law or precedent for psychological abuse. So it's oftentimes a dead end road where
Mm-hmm.
the person feeling that abuse, feel forced to leave to protect their mental well-being. And then, of course, it becomes like almost a snowball because it's the paycheck, it's the benefits, it's all of that based on something that happened to them. So anyway, we've got a lot of work to do.
So many things that resonate, and we have so much data that backs up
And,
all of the points that you've made.
oh, this is the springboard into that, right? So Marie, where do we find you? You've mentioned your blog. You mentioned the great work you're doing with Speak Out Revolution and the work from day to day. Where can we find you?
You will mostly find me tucked up in bed, napping. No, no, of course. So I would really encourage people, just because we've been talking about, workplace harassment and bullying, if they've had a negative experience in the workplace, we'd love to, where possible, invite you to anonymously document your experience with us at Speak Out Revolution. We are partnering with organizations that are trying to change legislation, trying to introduce best practice guidelines to organizations that want to be more inclusive, and understanding what those experiences look like is incredibly important. The more data we have, the more experiences we have, the less able people are to say that there isn't a problem, which is the first line of defense, right? We don't have a problem. Well, actually, yes, you do. You just don't know what it looks like, and we're here to tell you. So people can find us at speakoutrevolution.co.uk. It is a UK site, but we capture global data in the Speak Out survey. So if you search for either of those things, you'll find us. For anyone interested in the experiences of working while pregnant, please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Marie Hemingway. If you look at my feed, talking a lot about being pregnant. You can join me and other people that are sharing our experiences of what that's like and micro actions that everybody can take to make workplaces more inclusive. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd absolutely welcome that.
Amazing, Marie. And closing remarks as we wind down.
If there are any women out there working while pregnant, feeling like it's overwhelming, it's too difficult, it's incredibly hard to, get up each day and do their job. I can empathize. The workplaces, certainly in the UK, and I doubt the US is much different, and even globally, workplaces were not designed with pregnant women in mind, and I think it is our responsibility, and I'd like to take a little bit of that on myself to highlight to people where that is the case, to try and accelerate the work that is happening in the ED&I space, to incorporate pregnant women as a stakeholder group, because lots of women work, many women have children. We need workplaces that work for pregnant women, and absolutely would invite people where they feel like that to give themselves grace because it is difficult, and to join my blog series, share their experiences, put forward their recommendations for what organizations can do, because I am connected with a lot of people that work in ED&I, a lot of people that work in HR that want to change things. They just need to know how. And I think we can do that together, right? Women are unstoppable. And I'm very grateful to connect with as many women as possible, including yourself, Amy. So thank you very, very much for inviting me on your podcast. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.